Hi everybody. It's the beginning of week 4, which is shocking to me. It's gone really fast. I hope if it's gone fast for you, it's in a good way. This is the week when we're going to focus on the process of revising our work. So you all have 3 early drafts, and I hope you've been thinking about which one you'd like to revise for this week, and that you feel ready to do that. Ready or not, here we go. So, this particular video, I don't know if it's going to be as long as some of the others, but what you have next to it is another video that that I use a lot when I talk about revision. One of you has already seen it, sorry. It's the same one, but it takes a piece from that appeared in my book, and it starts with a very early draft of that piece, and then in a series of 3 slides walks you through how I revised that and what choices I made and why. And people seem to really like that. So that is the addendum to this. And now I'm going to talk about, in this video, I'll just talk about the general considerations to have in mind when you sit down to revise a piece, or when you're looking at a piece and getting ready to take another run at it. What are some things you can think about? So, I have this thing I've created, considerations when you revise, an incomplete list, because I'm sure there are more, but these are the ones that I tend to talk about the most. So, beginnings. Look at the beginning of your piece. Does it open with a sentence that pulls the reader in, that makes them want to know more? It's a very normal thing to have to write an early draft, and then in revision chop off the whole first paragraph. Poets talk about it being standard practice to chop off the first stanza, that's often, that beginning is kind of throat clearing, it's a warm-up lap, we're just getting into the piece, and we don't really start to get to the point till we're at least a little ways in. So starting in the middle of the situation is always a good trick at the beginning to open with action, right? So we're immediately excited to know what's going on. So the beginning is an important thing to look at. And so is the ending. Look at your ending. The weakest endings for me tend to be the ones that try to wrap everything up neatly with a bow. If you could rephrase your ending as "and they lived happily ever after," or "and then everyone died," or "and then I woke up," those are not good endings. You want your ending to, it's really hard to describe, but so go study endings. Look at the endings of the pieces that we've read together and see how they end. Sam Shepard, who just passed away within the past week, I saw a quote from him someone shared. It was something like, "The best endings point towards the next beginning." And I think that's really smart. That you don't want to end where things really end. You want it to sort of point the reader towards whatever the next thing is, or sort of hint at the resolution but not really get there. Study endings, right? Me talking in an abstract way about endings is less useful than you just reading a lot of endings. Just go through the 12 pieces that you've read for this class and ask yourself, how did they all end? Because there's some good lessons there. Know your own tics, right? We all have them. We all have these words that we reach for, phrases that we overuse, imagery we lean on too hard. If I were unfettered, if I were not edited, if I never revised, I think every sentence I use would have the word "just" in it. See, I did it again. I reach for that word without thinking about it. It's a verbal cognitive tic, and I know it. So one of the things I do when I revise is sometimes I'll do a search on "just," get rid of it, take it out. So figure out your tics. What are you doing without realizing it? And it's fine to do that stuff in early drafts, right? That's what they're for. Try not to think about any of this when you're just sitting down to write those early drafts, because you can really get in your own way. So write freely and then think about all this when you come back to revise. Abstractions, we've talked about those. Go through your piece and see when you're using abstract terms, when you really should be using something concrete and sensory. I think we've talked enough about that. Look for weak words. This is especially true of verbs, and we have talked about verbs. Check out your verbs. Are they doing their job? Are they conveying enough excitement? Are they conveying the right action? Some people feel that you should never use adverbs, that if you're using an adverb, it means you haven't chosen the right verb, that the verb is not descriptive enough, and that's why you're modifying it. I don't believe in moratoriums on anything, so I'm not as anti-adverb as some other writers, but if you're using a lot of them, and in fact, even if you use one, it's a good thing to just look at. You know, if I write that I walked slowly, there's that adverb slowly. Could I have come up with a better word than walked to describe that action? Probably. So they're just a good thing to think about. And subjects, verbs and subjects. What's the subject of the sentence? If the subject is it was raining, rain would probably be a better subject for that sentence. Or I don't know, I can't write it in my head, but you know what I mean. Look at the subjects, figure out in those passive verb constructions, often the subject of the sentence is the wrong subject. Trim out unnecessary words. And I think I talked about this already, but those, it's a really common thing in early drafts to want to preface a lot of sentences with, I looked over and saw, I heard the sound of the birds, I listened for the bubbling from the brook, I remembered, that's a big one, I remembered being in the car with my uncle, right? You often don't need those, right? If we know that the piece is in your perspective, we know that if there's a sound coming from the woods or someone is standing there, we know that you see that, we know that you hear that, we know that you are the reporter. You don't need to tell us that. So good to go through and see where you're using those kind of introductory phrases and take them out, because we don't need them. You may have to rewrite a little bit to make that work, but I don't remember how much I've talked about, I think I have a little bit, but these building blocks of scene, summary, and reflection. So we know what scene is. Scene is the action in the piece. So in Joe Mackle's The Little Girl at the Door, which is my favorite piece to talk about scene, summary, and reflection with, the scene is when he's actually talking to the little girl, or she's standing on the doorstep, and we see it. It's action, it's live action. Summary, excuse me, is often the backstory, action that happened before the piece started that we need to know to understand just the things that are happening in the piece, but it's not really part of the situation at hand, so we summarize that stuff. And then reflection is a really important part of creative nonfiction. So that in that piece, that's when Joe Mackle says stuff like, in many important ways, I'm much less of a person now than I was before. So that's that authorial interpretation of where he sort of takes a hold of the reader and says, this is what I've come to say, right? And it has to be really carefully done, because you don't want to overdo that, because then it's telling too much, it's explaining too much, but you also don't want to have it be absent, right? It's annoying, right? Because so many of these things are like, you want to do it, but you don't want to do too much, but you don't want to do too little. So it's finding that sweet spot, and we find it because we revise again and again and again. Do you have all the pieces? Are there sections missing? Or are there sections that you don't need? I'm going to talk about feedback here in a second, but getting feedback from other people is often a good way to find out if there are sections that if readers are like, I need to know more about X to understand your story. I need another section. I don't understand the importance of this to your narrator, or I don't understand this series of events. You need to tell me more about that. Or conversely, this whole paragraph feels interesting but irrelevant, so that's an extra section that can go. So just making sure that the whole piece is there, it's accounted for, it's present, and that there's not more of it than we need. Especially important in Flash, right? Because we want to keep it as short as we can and as efficient as we can. So feedback, right? I just talked about getting feedback from somebody. how do you do that? If you put your piece of writing in front of 10 other writers and say, what do you think? You're going to probably get 12 different opinions, right? Because we'll also contradict ourselves while we talk about it. So, and the feedback will be contradictory. Some people will say, I love this section. Someone else will say, I don't think that's working at all. How do you know what to do? This is a conundrum for every writer I know, right? So here, I can just tell you what works for me, and it may not work for you. This is what I do. I operate with I have sort of circles of writer friends in my life that I will turn to for feedback. And so there's but the innermost circle is, I think, 3 people. I think there are 3 people in that innermost circle who, when I show them a piece and they say, do this, and I go to one of them at a time, by the way, what do you think this needs? Give me feedback on this. I will do what they tell me to do, because I trust them so completely. They know me, they know my work, they know my voice, they understand what I'm trying to do. They absolutely get me and my work, and I do the same for them, right? And it's a tiny group of people. It's not the general public. It's not the general editorship of the world. It's, and it takes a while to find those people, and I'm fortunate that I have them. And then there's kind of the next tier out, people that I will solicit feedback from, but I listen with a different set of ears. I'm not listening with tell me what to do and I'll do it kind of ears. I'm listening with, what's your response? I know your work. I know you know my work. And I'm generally listening for a very specific thing. You know, I'm worrying about if all the sections are there, right? If I've told the whole story. I'm not always listening for sentence level, word level feedback, right? I want bigger structural feedback, and I will ask for that. This is what I want to know about. Don't tell me about the words or whatever unless you see something glaring. But you direct the people you get feedback from to get the feedback that you want. Right? It sounds really complicated, and it is kind of complicated. And sometimes I still get feedback that I don't know what to do with. Right? Ultimately, it comes down to going with your own gut. You have to develop that as well. Which is a nice segue into the last bullet point on my little list here, which is, how do you know when you're done? How do you know? I don't know that we do get to know, right? We do always need coffee, though. I know when I'm done, when I have revised it and revised it and revised it. Generally, years have gone by. I have taken breaks from it. I have written it and revised it and put it away for some number of months. I have come back and checked in on it and worked on it a little more, gone away, come back, revised, gotten feedback. It's gone through a bunch of these loops. It's had a few people say, it's had some of my innermost circle say, you're done. And I can say to them, like, I think this is done. Do you think it's done? Yes or no? Just yes or no. And then I revise it some more. And then finally, when I want to burn it down and burn the house down and leave myself in the house while I burn the house down, then I know that I'm close. Right? This is a long, annoying process. And for me, they're done when they get published somewhere. I just had a piece go up on Hippocampus. I should put a link to that on the page, I guess, for you guys. That went up this past week, and I revised it for 4 years. Somewhere around year 2, I thought it was done. I sent it out to a bunch of places. It has a long, lovely, pedigreed list of rejections. Some of them were notes from editors saying, like, that's really close, you're really close, almost, we almost took it. So those kind of encouraging rejections. I finally had an editor at Hippocampus say, we really like this, but we don't think it's done, and here's some specific things we think you could do to improve it. So I sat with that for a long time. I revised it some more. I didn't like the specific things they wanted me to do. I didn't agree, but I knew they were right that something needed to happen. So I did a really big ripping it apart and putting it back together revision on that piece, and now it's finally done. Well, it's published. I could keep working on it, right? In fact, when I give readings from my book, I edit the book from the podium. So the answer to how do you know when you're done is you're not ever done, right? You could be not done forever. You could keep editing that thing long after it's published. For me, I tend to be done when it finally finds a home because I need to move on to something else. And I think part of being a working publishing writer is living with the fact that you've got work out there with your name on it that you wish you could do over again. And being okay with that. And knowing, like, okay, well, I'll just do better the next time, because there's always going to be a next time. It'll never be the only thing you're going to publish. So I hope that's helpful and not just completely daunting. So that's the incomplete list of considerations when you revise. You'll see a lot of things in the revision example, the video that's also up, and I'm really excited to see how you guys revise one of your earlier pieces. I think that'll be really interesting for me, and hopefully for you as well. Email if you have questions. On the board, or on the course page, there's a sign-up sheet where you can sign up for your Skype session with me. I'm not going to send my comments out to you in advance. We'll talk about that when we meet, and then I'll send them to you afterwards. So, happy reading, happy revising, and I will talk to you one at a time really soon. Bye.